All right, let's take a look at the character and numeric wrapper classes. Every primitive data type that we have has a class that corresponds with it. And remember, when I say primitives, I'm talking about integers, doubles, booleans, even characters, chars. Those are all primitive data types, meaning that up until now, when we've dealt with them, we've always called them primitives. We've said that they're kind of, they're very simple. If you have a variable that has a primitive, it holds that value. That's it. It doesn't have anything special going on with it. But today we're going to learn that each one of those primitives has a corresponding class for it. So for integers, for ints, there's an integer class. Doubles, there's a double class. Even for chars, there's a character class. Why would we have these, you might ask? Well, these classes are able to take in those primitives and convert them into objects, and they allow us to use a set of really helpful methods. You'll see, we'll talk about, there's a few methods we've actually used in the past that we just weren't aware that that's what they were. And so let's take a look at this. So every primitive data type has a corresponding object type called a wrapper class with several useful methods. The first one we'll look at is the character class and some of its useful methods. So some of these methods include isDigit, isLetter or digit, is lowercase, is uppercase, is whitespace. And what all these do is exactly what they look like. They can test a character. So you'll see here we have a character, a char value. Wanted to show you this. This is an easy way for us to take. If you'll remember, there's not a get char method for the scanner class. So if you remember way back whenever we had to take a char in from the user, we would have to take it in as a string first using .nextLine. And then we would have to grab that char or that character from the first spot or the first index in that string. We usually did that in 2 lines, but I wanted to show you this cool way that we could get it done in 1 line of code. So .charat, if you remember, is a string method. So we can attach it with the period. We can attach it to a string because .nextLine gets a string. And so this actually works, and this is a way that we can grab a char from a user input. And so anyway, all of these methods can take in a char value and check it to see what type of data or what it is. Is it a digit? Is it a letter or whatnot? I don't want to say type of data. But all of these methods are going to return booleans. Is it or is it not? So this is a way that we can check that. One of our problems we're going to work here coming up is a password verifier. And so we can use these methods to test whether or not passwords are good. Did they submit a character? Did they submit a letter or a digit? Did they submit an uppercase letter? Is there a white space? Whatever. We can test all these things with these methods. And there's lots of other methods we won't go into. These are just ones that may show up for us. Okay, let's talk about the numeric wrapper classes. So there's some methods that can be useful out of the character class. Let's talk about the numeric wrapper classes. So this includes integer. Every single one of them has one. Integer and double are the ones that we're going to deal with in class, but there's also longs. There's just to take into account. There's also a Boolean wrapper class. So every single one of them has one. And most of them have the same methods and things going on, but some of them are a little bit different, just so you're aware of that. So first I want to talk about these they have some static class variables. I don't want to call these instance variables per se, because we can use these without having to set up objects of them, so I don't want to call them instance variables. These are just class variables that they have embedded in them with min and max values. These come in handy You may see these on the AP exam. I know for a fact that these come in handy in competition quite a bit. But each of these wrapper classes has these variables called min value and max value. And we can use these to return the minimum value for that data type or the maximum value for that data type. So if you remember, we've looked at a table in our textbook quite a bit that has all of these primitive data types listed and their minimum values and maximum values. And for some people, it's really hard to memorize those. We can actually spit these out using these calls to these variables. So just so you know, these exist. So these are just an example. So integer does have a max value method. Double does have a min value method. So they all have them. Long does as well. Longs do come in handy in competition too. Sometimes they have you deal with really long numbers. And so keep in mind that long has these as well. Okay, what about numeric wrapper class methods? Which ones are kind of important to know? There's a lot more than this. We're just going to talk about a few that come in handy and that show up in certain places that we deal with. But the first thing I want to talk about is what's called auto boxing and unboxing. These terms do come up in the AP exam, so you do need to be aware of these, like vocabulary wise. What auto boxing is the automatic conversion of a primitive into its wrapper class object. An example would be this line right here. So here we have a 3 right there. That is a primitive. That is not an object yet. So for reading or looking at it from right to left, that 3 is a primitive. What happens when it gets assigned, it's going to get assigned to int num, which is an integer, right? And because I have this capital I and I spell out the whole word, I know that that is talking about the integer class and not, as opposed to the primitive int. So when we're dealing with these numeric wrapper classes, we want to type out the entire word, give it a capital letter. And so what happens when I do this assignment to this object, int num, it auto boxes it, which means it puts it inside of that class, creates that object. So if you think like it's acting like a box, it's putting it inside of it, right? That primitive is getting put in there so that it can now use and utilize everything in that class. Unboxing is the opposite. So unboxing would be, so int num is an object now. It's an integer object. So unboxing is taking that and pulling it back out of that box or back out of that object or that class. And so here I simply have a primitive integer called num. And so when it does this assignment, it's going to pull it back out of the box, and that's called unboxing. And so then it's back to a primitive value. Some methods that are useful. Here's one in particular that we may have used before or may not have used before. It does come in handy in competition as well. And this is parsing. We can parse integers, we can parse doubles, we can parse longs. I'm just showing you an example of how to do a double here. So we ask the user to enter in a number, and then we take in that number right here as a string. Immediately after we take that in as a string, we call a parse double method. It's attached to the double class. So we just learned about static methods. So we can assume this is a static method because we did not make a double object here. We're simply calling the double class's parse double method. So it must be static. So that's something good to know. And what parsing does is it simply converts a string value into the corresponding numeric value. So if we're doing double.parse double, it's going to take that string, convert it into a double. We can also do integer.parse int, and that will integer parse integer, and it will convert it into an integer. Over here, I've got corresponding double variable or reference variable to store it inside of. But just so you know, I could also make that a regular double, like a lowercase double if I wanted to, and it still works. Where would this come in handy? In the past, if you remember, when we go from a string and go to a numeric value and back to a string, if you remember, the scanner class kind of messes up and it doesn't progress the scanner down to a new line. This is a way to bypass that issue, because technically we're always taking in a string. And so since we're using .next line, and so if we're always using .next line, there's no bouncing back and forth between a string and a numeric value. And so the scanner progresses like normal all the time. And so we can use parsing to bypass that issue. And like I said, this comes in handy some in class and the stuff we do in class, but really we see it a lot in competition. So toStrings. How does the toStrings work for these? They simply return a string representation of that numeric value. So this is good to know. It may show up some places. So if you call, if I've got a string str, if I say double.toString 5.5, it simply returns a string representation of 5.5. If I have, so double num, remember, was up here. I can call double nums.toString, and whatever it is that user put in, it'll return it as a string. If I try to just store double num inside str, that would obviously cause an error because double num is a double, and we're trying to put it inside a string. But if I call it as a toString, it returns the string value, and we're good. Okay, lastly, 2 binary string, 2 hex string, 2 octal string. These are available in all of the numeric wrapper classes, so double, integer, and longs, and all those. These definitely do show up in, or can show up in competition, so good to know. And they return the binary number-based conversion of these numbers. So int num, if you remember, was a 3, right? Up here. So if I take that 3 and I call the integers .toBinary string, it's going to return the binary representation of that integer as a string. 2hex returns the hex value of that number, octal, the octal value. And remember that these are available in the double and they are available in the long, and those are ones that we see most often in competition. So those are good ones to know. As far as the AP exam is concerned, autoboxing and unboxing are good things to know. Parsing definitely could show up. The .toStrings could definitely show up. These most definitely could show up, the min and max values. As far as these with the character class, I haven't seen much of these, but they're still good to know.